All right, folks, switching gears. Producer prices coming in hotter than expected in January. Inflation remains front and center, a major concern for Americans. Joining me now, Steve Forbes, Forbes Media chairman and editor-in-chief, also author of a new book, Inflation, What Is It? Why Is It Bad? And How to Fix It. The man of the hour. Let's start from the bottom. How do we fix it? Golly.
Well, you fix it. One is by having a stable value for the dollar, which they did following commodity prices and gold prices back in the late 80s and 90s. Right now, they just focus on trying to manipulate the economy. They think prosperity causes inflation. So stop mucking around with the dollar. The other thing is stop mucking around with the economy and creating these bottlenecks like they did with the lockdowns or putting on these regulations, which make it more expensive to do business. You know, banks are now going to be hit with new capital requirements already. What they call C&I loans, commercial industrial loans from banks to smaller businesses, declined last year instead of growing as you would expect in a recovery. So instead of having a booming economy, we have a limping economy.
What about things like this, the student loan thing? The trillions of dollars, the COVID aid package, when COVID was no longer the imminent threat, household balance sheets were as strong as they'd ever been, corporate balance sheets as strong as they'd ever been. Still, the administration pushed through $1.9 trillion. There was another $1 trillion in PPP loans and things like that. Never returned, no accountability. When you have $3 trillion or so floating around, and then on top of that, you tell people you don't have to pay your rent, you don't have to pay your student loan, that creates sort of a groundswell of spending. Doesn't that help explode inflation?
Well, yes, because inflation is when you devalue the dollar by usually creating too many of them.
Right.
And that's what they did here. How do you pay for this? You know, government spending comes from taking resources from the people, either through borrowing, taxation, or inflation, which is another form of taxation. So people are paying for it, but they try to disguise it and make it sound like it's a freebie. And they also undermine the integrity of debt when they do this kind of stuff. So that's going to make lending in the future more problematical. Again, hurting businesses, hurting growth. Right.
We've got this thing everyone on Wall Street is calling the maturity wall. You know, a lot of loans are coming up. A lot of real estate loans are coming up. A lot of personal loans are coming up. Delinquencies have gone through the roof. People who have low interest rates are going to have to, the next round of borrowing is, if they can borrow, will be at such a, it just seems like a ticking time bomb. And yet, Steve, I saw in the last 6 months, almost every major periodical, newspaper, and news outlet saying the American public was dumb, that they didn't know how good they had it. And the Biden administration, you don't understand how good you had it. Look at the data. And then when the data turns, like this week, the CPI report surges, PPI report surges. It's just, it was cold in January. What the hell? It's cold every January. And people have got to be frustrated.
It was warmer. Yeah. So the whole weather thing, it sounds like the communist countries, whenever they had a bad crop, they'd say, oh, the weather, or sabotage.
Yeah.
And so in this case, it's evil corporations.
What I'm concerned about, though, Steve, is that we keep whistling past the graveyard. Okay, inflation is rebounding. We saw it in the Philly Fed report. We saw it in Empire report. We saw it in CPI. We saw it in PPI. Also, consumers, housing starts, housing permits, retail sales. You can kind of feel it's hurting the American public.
It is hurting the American public. And that's why they don't buy this idea that happy times are here again. They know they're facing a storm, and even those who are doing well have no faith in the future. They don't think the economy is going to be doing well in the future, and that hurts future investment. So whether it's hurting bank lending, people trying to...
Is it too late have we crossed the Rubicon? When you start getting, 34 trillion, when we start spending $1 trillion a year on interest on our debt, have we crossed the Rubicon when you have, really, to be quite frank with you, both political parties are very reluctant to do any kind of real austerity?
Well, that's why I think next year, in 2025, circumstances are going to force major changes, whether it's an overhaul of the tax code, whether it's facing up on Social Security, like giving younger people their own personal accounts instead of relying on Washington politicians, reining in spending. They passed all of these tax credits and everything else for so-called green products. You could wipe out hundreds of billions of dollars of spending in the next 10 years by wiping out that stuff that we know from Europe does not work.
The other big issue, and I got less than a minute to go, but I've got to hit it. The election will have consequences, economic consequences. One will be taxes. If Biden is reelected, we can see taxes raised big time. Sky high.
Well, what that means is a real recession. Not prospects of one, but a real downturn, real rise in unemployment, and harm to our security. Here we have an unstable world, Russia, China, Iran on the march, and we're going to be weakening ourselves, which means we're not going to devote the resources necessary to have a credible defense, as we did in the 1980s and how we won the Cold War.
Right.
So really bad times are coming. And I hope the candidates, the Republicans, can make that case. This is a seminal, important election.
And I hope everyone can get a copy of your book. I hope you send one to the White House, too. Steve Forbes.
I did, but they're slow learners.
Probably came back unread.